I always thought if my marriage ever fell apart, it would be because of something I did, working too much, not paying enough attention, forgetting anniversaries. But I never expected this. It started with a knock on the door late one evening. I was in the middle of brushing my teeth when the heavy pounding echoed through the house. My wife, Claire, was already in bed, and for a second, I thought she hadn't heard it. But as I walked past the bedroom, I saw her sitting up, stiff as a board, her face pale in the dim light. I hesitated before heading downstairs. Something felt wrong. When I opened the door, I found myself staring at a police officer. His uniform was crisp, his stance authoritative, but it was his face that caught my attention, a little too familiar. "Mr. Carter?" he asked, his voice steady. "Yeah." He glanced past me into the house, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret? Or was it something else? "I'm Officer Reynolds. We need to talk." Claire appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. That was the moment I knew. The moment I realized my life was about to fall apart. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "What's this about?" I asked, crossing my arms. The night air was cool, but I felt sweat forming at the back of my neck. Officer Reynolds hesitated. I saw it, the slight shift in his posture, the way his hand twitched at his side. Cops aren't usually nervous. Unless they have a reason to be. "It's about Claire," he finally said. My stomach twisted. Of course, it was. "What about her?" I asked, my voice low. Another hesitation. Then he squared his shoulders, slipping into what I could only assume was his professional mode. "She came to the station earlier today," he said. "She filed a report." My chest tightened. "A report? About what?" He exhaled through his nose. "She claimed you've been threatening her. That she doesn't feel safe at home." The words didn't make sense at first. They just hung in the air between us, absurd and impossible. Then I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. "You're joking." "I'm not," he said, his face unreadable. My world spun. Claire, my wife, was telling people I was dangerous. That she was afraid of me. I had never once raised a hand to her, never even yelled at her outside of normal couples' arguments. "You believe this?" I asked, my voice tightening. Reynolds didn't answer right away. But I caught it, the smallest shift in his eyes. Guilt. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about Claire feeling unsafe. This was about him. My blood ran cold as I realized what was happening. This wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. I stared at Officer Reynolds, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a boulder. "You're telling me," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, "that my wife, Claire, walked into your station today and told you she was afraid of me?" He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, looking at me like he was waiting for me to break. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Tell me, Reynolds, before she came in to file this report, how long have you known my wife?" He flinched. "Barely." But I caught it. That was all I needed to see. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've been seeing her, haven't you?" Reynolds clenched his jaw. "Mr. Carter, this isn't about me." "No." I let the bitterness seep into my voice. "Then tell me why you're here. If Claire was really afraid of me, she'd be inside, shaking, crying. But she's not, is she? She sent you instead." The silence between us stretched. His grip tightened on his belt, like he was resisting the urge to do something. I could see it now, the guilt, the hesitation, the conflict. And suddenly, the pieces clicked together. Claire wasn't just having an affair. She was trying to get rid of me. And she was using him to do it. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my temper in check. My mind was racing, fitting the puzzle pieces together. Claire had been distant for months. Late nights at work, hushed phone calls, the way she had started locking her phone when she never used to. I had chalked it up to stress. Maybe even boredom. I never thought it would be something like this. You didn't answer me, I said, keeping my voice even. How long have you been seeing her? Officer Reynolds shifted his stance. Mr. Carter, I think it would be best if you calmed down. That long, huh? I let out a short laugh. And now she wants me out of the picture, is that it? Make up some story, file a complaint, paint me as the dangerous husband. I'm not going to stand here and listen to this, he cut in, his voice tight. Then why are you here, Reynolds? I stepped closer. If she's so scared of me, why send you instead of a different officer? Why are you standing on my porch instead of taking an official statement at the station? Silence. That was the answer I needed. She didn't file a real report, did she? I asked. Because if she had, there'd be paperwork. There'd be an actual investigation. But instead, she sent you here in the middle of the night. You thought you could intimidate me into leaving, didn't you? His lips pressed into a thin line. I had him. Tell me, I continued, pushing my luck. Did she cry when she told you? Did she tell you how I scared her? How she just wanted to feel safe? I shook my head. And you fell for it. She's got you playing her game. That's enough, Reynolds snapped, his face hardening. I came here to warn you. Claire doesn't want to press charges, but if she feels unsafe again, I won't be able to stop her from filing an official report. I let his words settle between us. Claire was making her move. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was setting up her escape plan. I had seen it before. I worked in finance, and I had watched men lose everything because their wives knew exactly how to play the system. First, they claim they're scared. Then, they get a friend, often a cop or lawyer, to nudge things in their favor. Then come the divorce papers, the restraining orders, the court dates. And suddenly, the husband is the villain in his own story. I was not going to let that happen. I took a step back and nodded, forcing calm into my voice. I hear you, officer. I'll give Claire her space. Reynolds studied me, as if trying to decide whether to believe me. Eventually, he gave a short nod. Good. I watched as he walked back to his patrol car, stealing one last glance at my house before driving away. When I stepped back inside, Claire was still at the top of the stairs. You sent him, I said quietly. She didn't answer. She just watched me. How long has it been going on? I asked. Her fingers tightened around the railing. Then, finally, she spoke. It doesn't matter. I felt something in my chest snap. It does to me. She let out a slow breath. You were gone all the time. Working late. Coming home exhausted. We stopped being us a long time ago. And Reynolds was the answer. I scoffed. She flinched. Just slightly. You're divorcing me, aren't you? I asked. Her silence was my answer. So that was it. She wasn't just cheating, she was planning everything. Lining up her story, preparing her case, and using Officer Reynolds as her pawn. And if she was already claiming she felt unsafe, that meant one thing. She wanted me out of the house. She was going to take everything. And worst of all, she thought I wouldn't see it coming. I stood there, staring at Claire as the weight of the situation settled in. My wife, the woman I had spent years building a life with, was looking at me like I was a problem she needed to get rid of. You've already talked to a lawyer, haven't you? I asked. Her expression didn't change. But she didn't deny it either. You're trying to get me out of the house, I continued. That's why you made up that story for Reynolds. I didn't make anything up, she said softly, her voice carefully measured. I just told him how I felt. I let out a dry laugh. Right. And how did you feel, Claire? Like I was suddenly a monster after all these years. Like I was someone you needed to be protected from. Her jaw tightened. Let me guess, I went on. You wanted to lay the groundwork. If you can convince people you're afraid of me, then you can get a judge to issue a restraining order. And if you get a restraining order, you get to stay in the house while I, the big bad husband, get kicked out. Her silence told me I was right. I shook my head, disgusted. You think I don't know how this works? I see it all the time at work. A woman claims she's scared, and suddenly, it doesn't matter what the truth is. The man loses everything. His home. His savings. His reputation. His life. Claire swallowed hard. For a second, just a second, I saw something in her eyes, guilt. But then she squared her shoulders, shaking it off. I didn't want it to be like this, she murmured. I want to move on. Move on. I repeated, anger bubbling beneath my skin. Move on from what, Claire? A stable marriage? A husband who worked his tail off to give you everything? She looked away. It's not about that. No. I took a step closer. Then tell me. What's it about? She hesitated. And in that moment, I saw it, the flicker of doubt. She wasn't as sure of herself as she wanted to be. She had been so confident in her plan, so certain she could manipulate the situation in her favor. But now, she realized I wasn't just going to roll over and let her take everything. You should sleep in the guest room tonight, she said finally, her voice quiet. It's better that way. I stared at her, my mind racing. She was setting me up. Pushing me to react. If I got angry, if I yelled, if I slammed a door, she could use it against me. I exhaled slowly. You want space? Fine. I walked past her, heading for the guest room. But as I did, I stopped at the doorway and looked back. You might think you've already won, Claire, I said. But you don't know me as well as you think you do. She didn't answer. But I could tell, for the first time tonight, she was scared. And not because she thought I'd hurt her. Because she knew I wasn't going down without a fight. That night, I lay on the stiff mattress of the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was out of the question. My mind was spinning too fast, replaying every conversation, every moment, every clue I had ignored over the past few months. Claire was planning something. Something big. She was already setting the stage with Reynolds. If she could convince enough people that she was scared of me, it wouldn't matter what the truth was. I could be kicked out of my own home. And once that happened, she'd have control over the house, the assets, maybe even my reputation. But she had made one mistake. She underestimated me. I knew the law. I had seen men get blindsided in court too many times, watching their assets drained and their lives dismantled piece by piece. I wasn't going to be one of them. So I made a plan. The first thing I did was grab my phone and open the voice memo app. I hit record and placed it on the nightstand. Then I spoke, calmly and clearly. This is Michael Carter. It's currently 12:37 a.m. on Thursday. I am in the guest bedroom of my house because my wife, Claire Carter, has asked me to sleep here. Tonight, an officer named Daniel Reynolds came to my home. He told me Claire had reported feeling unsafe around me. This is false. I have never threatened or harmed Claire in any way. I believe she is attempting to build a case against me to gain control of our assets in a divorce. From this moment forward, I will record all interactions with her as a precaution. I ended the recording and saved it. Then, I set up my phone in the corner of the room and started a video recording. If she tried to claim I did anything that night, I'd have proof that I never left this room. My finances were next. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank accounts. First, I transferred half of my personal savings into a separate account under only my name. Not a single penny of it was connected to Claire. Then, I checked my credit cards. No suspicious charges, yet. But I knew that could change fast. So I set up alerts for any large purchases. Finally, I sent an email to my lawyer. Subject: urgent, need to discuss divorce strategy ASAP. Michael. I have reason to believe my wife is attempting to set me up in a legal dispute. I'd like to discuss my options for protecting myself in the event she moves forward with a divorce. Please let me know your availability. M. Carter. I hit send. I didn't know how much time I had before Claire made her next move. But when she did, I would be ready. The real question wasn't just about the divorce. It was about Reynolds. How deep was he in this? Was he just a lover, or was he actively helping her? If so, how far would he go? A dirty cop could make my life very difficult. I needed to know exactly what I was up against. So, I did the one thing I knew would get me answers. I made a phone call. After 2 rings, a voice answered. Mike? Haven't heard from you in a while. Hey, Eric, I said. I need a favor. It's about a cop named Daniel Reynolds. A pause. Then a low chuckle. That name rings a bell. Why? I exhaled. Because I think he's sleeping with my wife. Eric let out a long whistle. Well, that's one hell of a reason to call. Eric wasn't just an old friend, he was a private investigator. A good one. You want me to dig? He asked. Yeah, I said. Find out everything you can about him. And if there's anything shady in his past. I want to know. You got it. I hung up. Now, all I had to do was wait. Claire thought she had control. She thought she had me backed into a corner. But she had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, Claire acted like nothing had happened. She moved around the house with that same calm detachment, making coffee, checking her phone, even humming under her breath. I watched her closely. She wasn't nervous. She was confident. Like someone who already knew how this was going to play out. She thought I was powerless. She had no idea what I had done last night. I grabbed my own cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. So, I said, watching for her reaction, what's your plan? She hesitated for half a second before looking at me. What do you mean? You know exactly what I mean, Claire. You didn't just wake up yesterday and decide I was dangerous. You've been planning this. So, what's next? Her lips pressed into a thin line. I don't want to fight with you, Michael. Of course not. You already set the wheels in motion, didn't you? I leaned forward. How long have you and Reynolds been together? A few months. A year. She didn't flinch. That's none of your business. I let out a humorless chuckle. Right. Because now that you've decided to rewrite history, none of it matters. She exhaled, shaking her head. Look, I don't want this to get ugly. But I need space. I need time. And I think it's best if I move out, I finished for her. She met my gaze but said nothing. I scoffed. Not happening. She blinked, like she hadn't considered the possibility that I might refuse. Her plan was clear now, get me out of the house first, then file for divorce. If she could establish herself as the wronged party, she'd have the upper hand. Too bad for her, I wasn't playing by her rules. I'm not going anywhere, Claire, I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. If you want space, you can go stay with Reynolds. Her eyes darkened. I had struck a nerve. You're being difficult, she said. No, I'm being smart, I corrected. You already took this to the police. You wanted to paint me as some kind of threat. But that's not going to work, because I have proof. Her breath caught just slightly. Proof. I leaned back in my chair. I recorded myself last night. Video. Audio. Everything. If you try to claim I did anything to you, I can prove I stayed in the guest room all night. Her expression didn't change, but I saw the tension in her shoulders. She hadn't expected that. Then, she did something I hadn't anticipated. She smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was cold. Calculated. You think that's enough, she said softly. You think one little video changes anything? And just like that, I knew. She had more planned. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated on the table. I glanced down and saw a text from Eric, my private investigator friend. Eric, you were right. Reynolds has skeletons in his closet. Call me. Bingo. I stood, grabbing my phone. This conversation isn't over, I told her. Claire didn't say anything. She just took a slow sip of her coffee, like she had already won. But she was about to learn something very important about me. I don't lose. I stepped outside and immediately called Eric. He picked up on the first ring. Tell me you have something, I said. Oh, I have more than something, Eric replied. Your boy Reynolds. He's got a history. I tightened my grip on the phone. Go on. He was investigated 2 years ago for using his badge to intimidate people. Mostly guys his ex-girlfriend dated after him. Harassment, threats, even pulling them over for fake violations. Internal Affairs looked into it, but nothing stuck. He got off with a warning. My jaw clenched. So, he's done this before. Not exactly this, Eric said. But the guy has a pattern. He doesn't like losing. And he sure as hell doesn't like being challenged. I exhaled. That means if he feels like he's losing control of Claire, he might get desperate. Exactly, Eric agreed. And that's something we can use. I nodded to myself. If Reynolds thought he had me cornered, I needed to turn the tables. I needed him to feel exposed. Can you get me documentation of that internal affairs investigation? I asked. Already sent it to your email, Eric said. But be careful, Mike. If Reynolds finds out you're digging, he won't take it lightly. I smirked. Good. Let's see how he likes it when someone plays his game better than him. I hung up, my mind racing. Claire thought she was safe with Reynolds backing her. But she had hitched herself to a weak link. And I was going to make sure he snapped. I went back inside, my mind buzzing with possibilities. Claire was still in the kitchen, pretending to be relaxed, but I could see it now, the way she kept glancing at me, waiting for my next move. She didn't have to wait long. Just got off the phone, I said casually, pouring myself another cup of coffee. Turns out your boyfriend isn't as clean as he thinks he is. Claire's fingers tightened around her mug, but she didn't look up. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do, I said. Officer Reynolds. Daniel. The guy who's been playing your personal bodyguard. He has a history of harassment. Internal Affairs even looked into him. That got her attention. She glanced at me, her expression carefully neutral, but I could see the gears turning in her head. If you're trying to scare me, it won't work, she said. I chuckled. Oh, I'm not trying to scare you, Claire. I'm trying to warn you. Because if Reynolds thinks you're slipping away, if he thinks he's about to lose control of you, he won't take it well. And guess what? I have proof that he's done this before. Her face paled just slightly. You're lying. Am I? I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and turned the screen toward her. Her eyes scanned the document, the official report on Reynolds' past misconduct. She swallowed hard. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, lowering my voice. You're going to call Reynolds and tell him you made a mistake. Tell him you need space, that you're rethinking everything. I leaned in. Because if you don't, I'll take this straight to his department. And trust me, they won't be as forgiving this time. She didn't respond, but I saw the fear creeping in. Good. I turned and walked toward the living room, leaving her to sit with the weight of what I had just dropped on her. The first domino had fallen. And now, I just had to wait for Reynolds to break. I sat in the living room, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. Claire's voice was low, but I could still hear her from the kitchen. Daniel, we need to talk. A pause. No, not here. Just meet me at the diner near the station in an hour. She hung up quickly. When she turned around, her face was a mask of controlled panic. She had always been good at hiding her emotions, but not from me. Not anymore. You really think this will change anything? She asked, crossing her arms. I think, I said, standing up, that you finally realize Reynolds isn't the savior you thought he was. I walked past her without another word. I had one more move to make. I arrived at the diner first. I chose a booth near the back, where I could see everything. I didn't have to wait long before Reynolds walked in. Claire was right behind him. I watched them from behind my menu as they sat down. Reynolds leaned in, talking in a hushed, urgent voice. Claire looked tense, like she was struggling with what to say. I gave them 2 minutes before making my move. Sliding out of my booth, I walked straight toward them. Reynolds was the first to see me. His whole body tensed as his eyes darkened. What the hell are you doing here? Joining the conversation, I said smoothly, sliding into the seat next to Claire before he could stop me. Hope you don't mind. Claire looked like she wanted to disappear. Michael. Relax, I said, keeping my voice calm. I'm just here to clear the air. Reynolds clenched his fists. Get up and walk away before you regret it. I smirked. You mean like how you regretted harassing your ex's boyfriends? The way Internal Affairs regretted not pressing charges against you. His face went rigid. Got him. Claire stiffened. Michael, please. No, I cut in. I want to hear what Officer Reynolds has to say. I want him to explain how he planned to make my life hell, just like he's done before. Reynolds' nostrils flared. You don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. Don't I? I tapped the screen. A voice recording began to play. It was from last night, the moment Reynolds had admitted that Claire hadn't actually filed a report, just expressed concerns. His face drained of color. You recorded me. I shrugged. You were on my property. One-party consent state. His jaw tightened. You son of a... Aha, I cut him off, tapping the screen again. Because if you do something stupid right now, I'll have this little chat recorded too. And trust me, that won't look good for you. His fists clenched on the table. You've got 2 options, Reynolds, I said. Option 1, you back off. No more threats, no more fake police visits, no more trying to intimidate me out of my own house. Or option 2, I take everything I have to Internal Affairs, the police chief, and maybe even a few reporters. His eyes darted to Claire. She didn't say a word. I leaned in. Let me give you some advice, officer. Claire isn't worth losing your badge over. He went still. I could see it happening, the moment he realized I was right. Finally, he exhaled sharply, jaw tight with barely contained rage. We're done, he muttered, standing up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. He threw one last glare at Claire. Don't call me again. Then, he stormed out. Claire just sat there, staring at the table. The silence stretched between us. Finally, Claire spoke. You played me, she whispered. I picked up my phone. No, Claire. You played yourself. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. So what now? You think we just go back to normal? I stared at her for a long moment. This woman, the woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, had tried to ruin me. She had used the law, used a corrupt cop, and when that failed, she had hoped I would just walk away. She thought she had won before the game even started. No, I finally said, standing up. We're done. But I'm not going anywhere. Her eyes snapped to mine. You're not divorcing me. Oh, I am, I said. But on my terms. You see, Claire, I've been recording everything. Every lie, every attempt to manipulate the situation. You don't get to play the victim anymore. She swallowed hard. I'll make you a deal, I continued. We do this quietly. You move out, you sign the papers, and you take whatever settlement my lawyer offers. I leaned closer. Or we can go to court, where I'll happily show a judge just how you and Reynolds tried to frame me. Her face paled. I smiled. Your choice. She didn't answer. But she didn't have to. Because for the first time since this all started, I was the one in control. Claire took the deal. A week later, she packed her things and left. I made sure the paperwork was solid. She got a modest settlement, nothing more. No alimony. No claim to the house. Nothing. As for Reynolds, Eric made sure his department got a little reminder about his past misconduct. Word spread fast. He was put on leave pending a review. A month later, he resigned quietly. And me? I moved on. It took time, but eventually, the anger faded. Claire had tried to take everything from me. But in the end, she lost. I didn't. And that was all that mattered. The end.